March 14th, 1988. I need you to write down that date. Bookmark it, do whatever you need to, not to forget that date. March 14th, 1988. On this day, in a small village known as Kera, in Bondokui, in western Burkina Faso, a little baby was born. This little baby was known as Ibrahim Traoré. At that time, of course, nobody knew about the baby or even the father, because you see, the father was a nurse, the mother a housewife. It was just a normal middle-class family in that region. But the term middle-class might be deceiving for you people in America or Europe. Middle class in this scenario simply meant a Burkinabe who had a job, because the vast majority of the Burkinabe people at the time, and even today, were jobless. But at least little Ibrahim's father was a nurse, he had a job, he had a monthly income. Furthermore, the western part of Burkina Faso, where this baby was born, is a fertile region of the country. Growing up, this baby, this toddler, this child, was able to see the fields full of rice that people planted there, full of yams, full of cassavas, groundnuts. That's why, to date, if you look at many of the projects that Ibrahim Traoré launches and supports, that his government is really enthusiastic about, they're actually agricultural in nature. Not just because agriculture is the mainstay of the country, as is the case across Africa, but also because he grew up in a farming region. Bro is actually a farmer at heart. Now, it's very important for you to look at that, where he was born, the fact that he was born in a normal, ordinary Burkinabe family. What then happened between 1988 and 2022 when he became president? That's what we're going to look at in today's show. Ibrahim Traoré was born 4 months, 27 days after the tragic, evil, diabolical assassination of Thomas Sankara. They took out Thomas Sankara. They didn't know that less than 5 months later, another Sankara would be born. Which is why I have been telling you that all the 54 countries in Africa need their own versions of Ibrahim Traoré, their own versions of Thomas Sankara, because when that happens, there's nothing anybody can do. No imperialist, no neo-colonialist, no corrupt ruling president, nobody would be able to stop Africa from the transformation that it deserves. So today, we are going to look at what happened from that day, March 14th, 1988, until September 2022, when this baby became the president of the great country of Burkina Faso. My name is DJ Bokali, and Africa is my superpower. Africa should be your superpower too. Africa is Ibrahim Traoré's superpower, and he has been able to tap into that power the same way that you too, right there in Jamaica, Wagwan, right there in the United States of America, right there in Britain, in France, across Europe, wherever the Africans are in the diaspora, wherever you are, you too can and must tap into your superpower. And right here in the motherland, where it all began, let us all work on this journey of tapping into our superpower as Africans. Let us awaken, unite, and transform Africa. Now, Ibrahim Traoré was not born into some royal class, but he's royalty. Just like you are royalty. As long as you're African, you're royalty. Ibrahim Traoré, growing up in that part of Burkina Faso, he was just an ordinary kid. I need you to remember that he was just an ordinary kid, just an ordinary teenager. The name Traoré most likely comes from the Mandinka ethnic community. Ibrahim Traoré is understandably very private about his family, about even his tribe, understandably so. But the name Traoré is very common in the Mandinka community. Now, I want to tell you something about this community that is very relevant to today's episode. But I also want to touch a bit on the privacy. You see, a lot of times you will be seeing videos, and you have seen videos of people claiming this is Ibrahim Traoré's wife, these are his kids, things like those. Don't buy into many of these things. Unfortunately, there's a group of people who have realized that anytime you talk about Traoré, you drive the traffic to your website or to your channel or to your platform. So a lot of times people like sharing sensational news that is really not grounded in truth. And that is doing disservice to Ibrahim Traoré. There is so much to share about Traoré that is substantive and true and inspirational that people shouldn't have to manufacture things for the sake of traffic. So let us make it our mission to truly understand the essence of what fuels Ibrahim Traoré, so that we can also increasingly tap into that the same way that Traoré himself is following in the footsteps of Sankara. We don't talk about Traoré to glorify him because he's human like all of us, but we talk about him to glorify his ideals, his principles, his ideas.
Vous êtes plus que des amis, vous êtes plus que des voisins. Vous êtes nos frères, vous êtes nos sœurs. Parce que la fraternité va au-delà de l'amitié ou du voisinage. Nous avons le même sang qui coule dans nos veines.
Nobody can stop an idea whose time has come. Nobody can do that. So I welcome you to today's episode. Last week, we started to dig a lot deeper into Ibrahim Traoré, the ordinary Ibrahim Traoré. Today, we're going to continue doing that. And the reason we're doing that is so that you can understand that you, ordinary as society says you are, you have what it takes to change your country, to change your community, to be the best version of yourself. That's why today we are focusing most of our time on the ordinary Ibrahim Traoré before he became president. Now, I've already told you that the name Traoré is very common amongst the Mandinka people. And here's what I want you to understand about the Mandinka people. And then we will get to the name Burkina Faso, what it means, and why that is important for the story of Ibrahim Traoré, the ordinary person. The Mandinka community is found in 9 West African countries, 9 of them. From Senegal to Cote d'Ivoire to Burkina Faso itself to Sierra Leone, there are 9 countries where the Mandinka community is found. Why is that important? Because today's Africa continues to glorify the colonial borders that were imposed on us, yet people like the Mandinka community cut across West Africa. That needs to be a reminder that we are one people, we are one family, we are the African people.
Nous avons le même sang qui coule dans nos veines.
Let us just look at the Mandinka people and multiple other communities in Africa that cut across these borders to use that as a reason of us uniting. I have done a mini episode on that. You'll find it in the link below. We must not allow these colonial borders to divide us, which is why President Traoré today is working day and night. He has rolled up his sleeves and is working day and night for this African unity to be realized.
L'Afrique, ce continent qui a tant souffert et qui continue de souffrir du fait des impérialistes. Ces impérialistes n'ont qu'un seul cliché en tête. L'Afrique est l'empire des esclaves. C'est comme ça qu'ils voient l'Afrique. Pour eux, les Africains les appartiennent. Nos terres les appartiennent. Nos sous-sols les appartiennent.
Let's look a bit at Burkina Faso. Remember, initially, this great country was known as Upper Volta. But when Thomas Sankara arrived, he was like, wait a minute. Why must we use the name that the French gave us? Why? Can you imagine an entire country using a name that was imposed on them by the colonialists? So Thomas Sankara said, we are going to have a rebirth even of our name. And so he came up with Burkina Faso, which is a fusion of Burkina and Faso. Burkina is a Mossi word. Mossi is the largest ethnic community in Burkina Faso. They constitute like 40% of the population. So Burkina is a Mossi word that means integrity or upright. Faso is a Jula word. Jula is another community in Burkina Faso. Faso is a Jula word that means homeland. And so Burkina Faso together means land of the upright people. And I dare say that this is one of the reasons why Burkina Faso continues to lead as an example, to lead by example for the rest of Africa through these 2 transformative leaders. Now, let me just tell you to show you this craziness. Nigeria, whereas Burkina Faso is a name that Thomas Sankara gave his country, Nigeria is a name that was given by Florence Shaw, a British journalist. She looked at River Niger, and then she simply Latinized it, if you will. She added the suffix to show that Niger and then IA, Nigeria, to mean the land of Niger River. And then in 1914, Britain simply merged the Upper Protectorate and the Southern Protectorate, and voila, Nigeria was born. There's nothing wrong in, of course, Nigeria continuing to use the name Nigeria. That is something for Nigerians to decide. But what is really, really important is, just like Burkina Faso, since the time of Thomas Sankara, has been going through this process of rediscovering itself and its essence, reconnecting with its roots. Even Nigeria must do that. Every African country must do that. And the starting point is to realize that these colonial borders cannot continue to define Africa. We're not saying that Nigeria should cease existing, or Ghana or Benin, but what we're saying is that we need to make these borders increasingly irrelevant. There's something really important that you need to understand regarding Burkina Faso's economy during this period when Ibrahim Traoré was born, because it informed the young man that he became, the young adult that he became, and later on, the president that he became. During this time, Burkina Faso's GDP per capita was $301. Meanwhile, the GDP of France was roughly $15,000 during this same period. That is multiple times more than Burkina Faso's.
President of the United States of Africa, Volume 1, written by Melissa Ama-Jenfi. Available to buy now at Love Me Stories and Amazon.
Now, this whole issue of GDP, every time we mention GDP, please remember one thing, that the extent of poverty in Africa is not inherent in Africa. Africa is not poor because Africa was born to be poor. Africa is poor because it is made poor by the corrupt ruling elite in Africa and by the imperialist forces outside Africa, by the forces of neocolonialism. So that's the Burkina Faso that Ibrahim Traoré was born in, where most of the people were living below the poverty line. That's the country that this little baby was born in. It's still the country that, as president, he is doing everything in his power to fight that poverty, even more than he is doing to fight the terrorism that is plaguing his country at the moment. Now, you have to look at that and spotlight the ordinariness of Ibrahim Traoré's childhood. In Kera village, in Bondokuy, Western Burkina Faso. Just an ordinary kid in an ordinary family. Because currently, one of the dangers of merely looking at the mythologized version of Ibrahim Traoré, the exalted version, is that it can make people forget that this is just an ordinary human being who has tapped into his African superpower. And when we mythologize him like that, we can easily excuse ourselves and say that that is Ibrahim Traoré, but for me, I'm just an ordinary African. I don't have what it takes to change my country. And that would be so erroneous. That would be completely erroneous. Remember that he was born in a humble family, in an ordinary village. He wasn't even born in Ouagadougou at all. Don't forget that as we continue looking at the ordinary life that he lived and the extraordinary steps he took to reach where he has reached. Before we fast forward to 2022, just before the coup d'etat that brought him into the presidency, I also want you to remember that indeed it takes a village to raise an African child. And this village that Ibrahim Traoré was part of is a part of his story. The numerous videos that you have seen of him visiting villages simply speak to the person that he is. He knows that these are his people. And like many other presidents who never even step in villages, who forget their roots, he has made a conscious decision not to forget the fact that he was born in Kera village, just like many other Burkinabe people who are also born in rural parts of the country, are also from villages. And he understands that these are the people in whose hands sovereign power is vested. He understands that. Now, let us fast forward to 2022, and then we will go back in time again. I remember it like it was yesterday, September 2022. I remember when I watched on the news when the Western media gleefully reported that there has been yet another coup in Burkina Faso. And I remember how those newscasters were falling over themselves to report that this was a coup that took out a president who had also taken over in a coup. And they were reporting it in a manner that suggested that there they go again, those Africans. They can't seem to live without them coup d'etats. And at that time, if I could describe the emotions within me in one word, it would be sadness. Remember that time, nobody knew who Ibrahim Traoré was. We just knew that the coup leader is 34-year-old Ibrahim Traoré. That's all we knew. So I felt sadness because for me, I wondered if this uncertainty in Burkina Faso would ever end. I just felt an overwhelming sadness that there was so much political uncertainty, so much upheaval, so much insecurity in this amazing country. That doesn't mean that I was crazy about Ibrahim Traoré's predecessor, Paul Henry Damiba. I wasn't crazy about him. I could remember in January when he led the coup d'etat that took out Rochemar Christian Kabore. And from January to September, there really wasn't much to write home about Burkina Faso because the same insecurity continued unabated. The same insecurity continued. I didn't see anything inspirational or amazing that this guy had brought on board when he took over as president. So I was very suspicious that maybe it will be the same old, same old, same old. I also wasn't crazy about the then president, Rochmark Christian Kabore, because for the 6 years that he was president, there wasn't much to write home about also. Yes, he won re-election in 2020, but he won re-election against a backdrop of increasing insecurity, increasing poverty, increasing division. He won re-election by using the same playbook that African incumbent presidents like to use: divide the people, claim that you achieved what you didn't achieve, use your incumbency to plummet the opposition, like what Mama Samia Suluhu is doing, just plummeting the opposition, or what William Ruto in Kenya is doing, throwing seeds of confusion and grenades of confusion in the opposition, at least the traditional opposition. So I wasn't crazy about those 6 years. So when I say that I was not smitten by Ibrahim Traoré during those early days of his presidency, it doesn't mean that I was crazy about his predecessors. Remember, between Thomas Sankara and Ibrahim Traoré, there were 7 presidents. 7 presidents. But if I tell you to name 2 or 3, probably you cannot do so, because they didn't impact Burkina Faso or Africa in any meaningful manner. They didn't do it. They didn't. So I assumed that probably it will just be the same old corrupt leadership that even this new president will bring on board. Now, at this time, it is important to briefly spotlight and look at Blaise Compaoré for less than a minute. Because if you're going to be president for 27 years, if you're going to be president because you engineered and orchestrated the assassination of your one-time best friend, a president who was impacting your country, a president who was impacting the entire Africa, and leaving amazing indelible footprints on the entire world, a president who made Africa believe again. If you're going to assassinate him so that you become president and then reign for 27 years, how will history remember you? Blaise Compaoré, if perchance you ever watch this, the least that you can do is to confess to the people of Burkina Faso and the people of Africa. The courts have already rendered their judgment. But the even more powerful judgment belongs to the people of Africa. The least you can do is to confess to them and to reveal to them how you colluded with France and USA to take out one of Africa's finest sons. That's the least you can do. So we look back at those 27 years that Blaise Compaoré was president with a lot of rage and a lot of sorrow. But we celebrate the fact that they are now a brutal footnote in the history of Burkina Faso. They are no longer in the present. So again, I challenge every African watching this. Ask yourself if your president is behaving like Blaise Compaoré by merely perpetuating their own interests, looking out for their own interests, and doing everything they can, including killing, to take out those they perceive as obstacles. If your president is doing that, they have no business occupying that seat. It's a sacred seat and should only belong to transformative leaders. Let me quickly say something here before we get back into the ordinary Ibrahim Traoré. The other reason I was very slow to accept Ibrahim Traoré was because Thomas Sankara has impacted my thinking and my life so much, as he has to millions of others, that sheer loyalty to Thomas Sankara kept me from beginning to look at Ibrahim Traoré with an open mind and an open heart. Because a part of me was feeling like, you know how an only child who sees after 10 years a younger sibling born, and yes, they love this younger sibling, but they just feel that I don't want to share my parents. You know, I've had them to myself all along. I was feeling something similar to that, where I was not resentful of Ibrahim Traoré, but I just felt that Thomas Sankara was so sacred in terms of the leadership he provided, the inspiration he provided, that I didn't want anybody to replace him until I understood one thing. Until I understood that Ibrahim Traoré was not seeking to replace Thomas Sankara. He was in fact following in the footsteps of Thomas Sankara. It was not about replacement, it was about reverberation. It was about powerful history repeating itself. The more I watched Ibrahim Traoré, the president, the more I began to see how indeed he was allowing the legacy of Sankara, the example of Sankara, to impact him in a transformative way. The same way that we're now saying that Africans should ensure that their presidents similarly walk in those footsteps. Now, I understand the presidents, if they ever watch this, would bristle at what I'm saying, and they'll say, we are carving our own path. But if that path that you keep carving for Africa is one that leads to division, one that leads to poverty, it is a path that we cannot allow you to continue carving that supposed own path that you're doing. We must now have a path of transformative leadership, the kind that is exemplified in this generation by Ibrahim Traoré. Let us now go to the ordinary young man, the ordinary teenager, before he became the transformative president that I've just talked about.